es mi Dios. El Señor me premia por mi conducta y mi valor. Es mi Dios, es mi Dios. Te alabaré, Señor. Te alabaré, Señor. El Señor es mi bastión, mi baluarte y salvación. Es mi Dios, es mi Dios, mi escudo y defensor, Salvador que libra hoy. Es mi Dios, es mi Dios. El Señor me premia por mi conducta y mi valor. Es mi Dios, es mi Dios. Te alabaré, Señor. Te alabaré, Señor.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Drink Podcast of Joy, the David Drake Show. How are you guys? I hope that you're doing well here on Periscope Live, on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live. Welcome to the show. Come in. Let me know where you're watching me from. If you want to comment on today's show, where we're going to be talking about a lot of great things that I'm really excited about, especially this idea of how to process the losing of a parent, especially in your teenage life, and then how to have courage now at midlife. Especially if you want to talk about that, please let me know. I'm going to be reading a lot of the comments here on Periscope Live. So if you want to go over to Twitter/Periscope, you can just look for me at David Trigg LA. Go to your Twitter feed and then click on Periscope. It'll open the app and you can be right in. If you are on Facebook Live, I also invite you to come in. Welcome. Let me know where you're watching me from. If you're here in the area, if you're maybe from out of town, if you're in the Colorado area, wherever you may be, welcome to the David Trigg Show. My name is David Trigg, and I am a pastor. I'm also a musician and also a media consultant. I love people that are into media, and I myself love to help people in anything dealing with podcasting, with live streaming, etc. But today, on this beautiful day, I wanted to talk about this very important topic that I hope that you share with your friends, that you share with people in your life, that is about something in many ways very personal to me, and I think very relevant to a lot of people, and that is the losing of a parent when you're in your early teens or early in life. And so I want to get into this here fairly quickly, just to give you a chance, hopefully, to kind of process with me a little bit of this. Maybe if you yourself have dealt with something similar, turn down the music here a bit, I hope that you too can process with me, that maybe this can give you a way to talk about something that not everyone really feels comfortable talking about, and that is the idea of what do you do when you lose a parent early in life. So let me give you some background here, and first let me tell you that this is in many ways, not the easiest thing for me to talk about, mostly because it takes time, and it has taken time for me to even know how to talk about it. So let me give you first some background. Let me first, before I get into my background, let me tell you a couple more things. First is it takes time to talk about it. Second is I want to encourage you to basically to also give yourself time to even process what I'm going to talk about today. Because the losing of a parent, whether it's something that happened to you when you were a young woman or a young boy, or maybe in your teenage years or even in your 20s, it's something that, as I said, can be very traumatic. I would say number 3, know that there are no quick solutions. I don't have necessarily a lot of advice. I mean, I think there are some things that I can share with you and I want to share with you as far as courage, especially now as we're now raising our own children. But the idea here is to simply share my story and to hopefully hear from you as well in terms of how you feel and how you're processing similar things. Maybe lastly is you may not have lost a parent, but maybe there's trauma in your life that relates to bullying, that relates to abuse, that relates to maybe moving even from one state to another or one country to another. And some of those losses, that grieving that we all experience, might come out or surface as I talk about my story. So with that said, let me tell you a little bit about my story. So when I was 9 or 10 years old, I went through, there was a war in my native Nicaragua. And so I was born in 69. So in 1978 or so, all the rumblings of war began from 1978 to about 79. So for that year, when I was 9, 10, I went through a lot of trauma that came from war. So when I was then 10 or 11, I began to travel to the U.S. to visit my grandma. And so finally, kind of a long story short, when I was about 12, then there was a mandatory draft in Nicaragua. And a lot of kids like me, especially obviously young boys, were shipped out of the country to Europe, to Canada, for me to the U.S. My grandma lived here. I had the blessing, it was the luck from God that I had a family member here in Long Beach in the LA area. So I came to visit with my grandma. I remember I flew to LAX and I thought it was a party, to be honest. But my point is that for the next 20 years, I didn't see my parents hardly at all. I think I saw them at my wedding, and maybe there was one other time that I saw them in those 20 years. And so in many ways, for me and for many young men and women like me from Central America, it also happened in different parts of the world, we experienced the loss of our parents, the loss of our homes, the loss of, in many ways, our culture and language. And there's also a lot of immigration fear that set in. But I'm not going to talk about that as much. I want to focus on the loss of a parent. So my father didn't die when I was 12, but the loss that I experienced was, in many ways, looking back now, very similar. And so since then, since that time, I began to experience, as I've said before, a lot of highs and lows, mostly a lot of highs. I felt empowered. I felt thankful. I felt alive, free. You can imagine, I was in many ways, a dream state. But later in life, I began to realize that loss of being away from my mom and dad was traumatic. And it really was like a parent dying. In my 30s, I think it was about 30, 31, my father actually did pass away. And so in many ways, that was like a second loss, a second death. So I feel like I lost my father when I was 12, and then I lost my father when I was in my 30s. And then I lost my grandmother who raised me right around that time as well. So I experienced many losses. And my mother, by the grace of God, is with me still, and I love her, and I have a great relationship with her. And but I think something about young boys and their dads, right, that really impacted me. I want to tell you something else that happened just in the last, I don't know, even few weeks. I have a friend who's a therapist who I've seen for many years, and I was talking to him about my past 3-4 years ago when I saw him last. Well, I've seen him since then, but I was just thinking back on that time. And he was telling me that what he's noticed is when I talk about my dad, I tend to shut down. And I don't really like talking about that loss or that time of my life. And I agreed with him that there was so much pain bottled up inside of me that needed to come out. So I've been working through a lot of that over the last 2-3 years. And I think that I've learned a ton. The second thing that happened that has been really impactful is I was just watching this actually earlier today. You obviously know the Trump campaign and Megyn Kelly, who was one of the reporters that asked him a lot of tough questions, and they had this big debate and et cetera. So she wrote a book called, I forget the name of the book. She wrote a book, so she's been out publicizing the book, but doesn't really bother me, or I don't really care much about her and Trump. But the part that impacted me on this interview that I was watching on CNN with her and Anderson Cooper was about her father. When she was, I think she said, a sophomore in high school. I think the name of the book is Stand Strong. I forget. Look it up. It seems like a great book. I haven't read it, but she was saying that when she was a sophomore in high school, that she lost her father. And then Anderson Cooper was telling her that he lost his father when he was maybe, I think, 5 or 6 years old. And then he quoted Megyn Kelly, a quote saying that a young daughter always feels strong when you lose a father, but never safe. So something like that. And it really hit me that's in many ways my story, that I also have felt very strong, but I wouldn't say I feel unsafe. I would say for me, even though I've always felt strong, but I have felt insecure at the same time, or maybe unsure of myself. Even though I've succeeded at just about anything that I've done, I feel like the most happy and blessed and lucky man alive. I have an amazing wife of 21 years, 3 beautiful children who are succeeding at life. I have an amazing church that I pastor, and I love my life. And yet when Anderson Cooper was asking Megyn what the impact of her losing her father was, she said that even though she too has scaled the ladder per se of reporting and TV personalities, that gap remains. And I guess I wanted to use that as a launching pad. I feel the same way. And maybe this is something that can help you. I don't think it doesn't really matter how far or how high I climb per se. Not that I'm trying to climb, but you know what I mean. Like no matter how successful I may find myself or how blessed my life is, I find that gap is always there. And especially that lack of affirmation of knowing that I'm doing the right thing. Even though I think I'm doing the right thing and this and that and the other, or I know that I'm doing the right thing, or I have confidence, there's still this void of that voice that I didn't have growing up that comes back very strong a lot of times. Now, all of that to say, oh yeah, one more thing that in the interview Megyn Kelly and Anderson Cooper talked about was the last time that she interacted with her dad, and that it was a very difficult moment. She was, again, a sophomore in high school, and she got into a fight with her dad. So the last memory that she has of her dad, who she adored, was of them getting into a big fight over a class ring. I guess she wanted a nicer one and they couldn't afford one, so they got into a fight. She went to her room, kind of upset, and the last memory she has of her dad was of him sitting on the couch staring at the Christmas tree. Next thing she knows, her sister comes into her room. Wake up, Megan. Dad had a heart attack. In a matter of hours, she says, maybe the next day, he passed away. And so it got me thinking of so many things in my own life and maybe in your life. I remember when I lost my father. I remember leaving home when I was 12, like I said, getting in an airplane. I remember when I went back home to do the eulogy for my father, and the memories that I have of that day are so strong in my life. I remember changing in the taxi from the airport to the church, putting on a suit, putting on my pants, putting on my dress, outfit and a tie, and I walked into the church, and it was packed with 500 people. And in the middle of that, my first memory, this is my first, in many ways, my last image of my dad. There was a casket in the middle of the church, and I had to literally walk by the casket. I looked in, there he was, and then I had to walk on stage and give the eulogy and be the strong young man that people wanted me to be, and that I wanted to be. And those memories are, I think, they remind me of the courage that I have, that God's given me, but they also remind me of how crazy and difficult that moment was. And so what I want to say are a few things. First is that when you lose a parent, that memory never leaves you. You may have lost a dad. Especially, I think I want to talk about dads, whether you're a young lady losing a dad or a young man. Especially losing a father. There's something powerful that happens. They say that when a man loses his father, a young boy, even a man, you could be in your 40s now, that you face your own mortality. When I lost my father, he was 57. I'm now 47. And every time that I age one more year, that I'm 47, 48, I always find myself counting backwards, thinking, okay, I have 10 more years now, because there's something that happens when you lose a father at a certain age, in my case 57, where you think that that's when your life is going to end. You can't see past that. You know what I'm talking about? Megyn Kelly mentioned the same thing. Anderson Cooper, the same thing. It happens where you begin to face your own mortality in light of when your father passed away. And so it's something crazy that happens. And so I constantly fight that I don't have 10 more years, that I have 50, or I could have 1 year. It doesn't matter. The point is that my life is in God's hands, but yet that memory is there. The second thing is the courage that comes now that we're raising, my wife and I, 3 teenagers. And now as I have a son who's 12, and I begin to imagine what he sees in me. And I don't think, he's gonna lose me like I lost my father. I don't have those kind of thoughts. But I do think about the impact that my life has on his little life. And I think of the courage that it takes to be us, to be a good parent, to be a working citizen, to be a person who does God's will in whatever area that you're involved in. And the courage that takes, and yet the gap that's there. I would say the third thing that I think about is the hang-ups that I have, that we experience, even now, even through a lot of therapy and a ton of prayer and processing this, and I've written about this endlessly for years. There is no quick answer to this. There is no one size fits all, or I do a prayer, or I go see a friend and it's all healed. I don't think this is something to fix. I think it's in many ways a cross to bear, a pain to carry. I have a friend, Alberto, who was a good childhood friend of mine. He and I have been Facebooking, whatever you call that, talking on Facebook about our own experiences growing up. We grew up in the same church, same country, very similar stories of war and separation. And we were both joking about our, quote, books that we're writing. And my point is that it's important that you have friends that you talk to about this, because the hang-ups or the pain is there. Megyn Kelly was talking about that She went through bullying. She went through, obviously, the loss of her dad. And that shapes and tints everything she does now. That the way she processes how her and Trump are doing, it goes back to her father. The way that she is, in the news, she's kind of a strong person and very kind of, I don't know, manly in some ways, you could say, very firm. It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that she talks about how a lot of that is shaped by her own loss of her father. My point is that it's very important that you and I be aware of how that loss shapes who you are, because you might overreact. I find myself sometimes overreacting to things that make me feel insecure, or that I second guess myself so much, even though I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. And that comes from that trauma of losing my father early in life. And it doesn't just go away. It's not something that, as I said, that you go up to the altar and you pray out once. It just doesn't happen. It's a deep loss that we experience. But I would say, maybe lastly, the courage that comes from that experience is amazing. We rise. I have risen in spite of that loss. Everyone experiences loss. Everyone has been through hell and high water in some way or another. You may have lost a child yourself. Maybe, as I said, you've been through trauma from domestic abuse, domestic violence, or maybe sexual abuse, or maybe you went through an abortion, or you went through a really bad stint with drugs, and you have trauma as an adult that you deal with now. Maybe you went through that when you were younger. We all experience trauma, but the blessing comes when we are able to rise in courage and in strength in light of those moments of crisis, through those moments of crisis, where you have the courage to deal with that stuff, to be aware of the problems and the hang-ups and how it filters your view of life, but you rise above that and you use that as fuel to not give in to the fear or to not give in to the hate or whatever thing you feel. Here's something that I find that happens a lot. There are triggers to that insecurity in my life. There may be triggers in your life. So when this whole thing with the election, has happened, I don't get triggered per se in terms of, I don't know, causes or the Supreme Court or that kind of thing, or even race. I get triggered in terms of separation and immigration, and the fact that I went through a loss when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, etc. And that when events happen, like happened last week, I go back to that young man and I have to then work with that young man. As you know, if you've been to therapy, that inner child or that young David or that young Mary or that young Frank, whoever you may be, you have to then go back to that and to not feel guilty because you're not perfect or you're not healed. That's something that my friends and I and my therapist and I have talked about greatly, is to not feel guilty because you're not perfect yet or not healed or you're still dealing with it, because I feel like sometimes our spiritual guilt or even our own ambition or perfectionist attitudes tell us you should be done with this already. You need to just suck it up, buttercup, and just simply white knuckle it and be over it already. Come on, everyone has lost something in life. Why are you still all weepy over it? You know what I'm talking about? But then what happens when you hide that? It comes out in other ways, and guess what? It comes out in worse and worse ways. You end up hurting other people. You end up hurting yourself. You end up not stepping into your own dream and destiny that God has for you because you have some undealt business. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Am I preaching yet to somebody? So for me, one of the things that I remember that happened as a kind of as a regret or maybe an impact that the loss of my father had on my life was really my pastoring and my calling to pastor. As you know, I've been a worship leader my whole life. I've loved it. It's been my outlet. It's been my dream. It's been a call. It's been a lot of things. But since I was maybe 30, and I'm now 47, probably let's say 20 years ago, I was called by God as clear as daylight to actually be a lead senior pastor. Not a worship leader, but to actually be a senior pastor of a church. When I was 30, I heard it clearly. The quick story is I was sitting in church. I had just led worship. Magic things happen, wonderful things. I sit down. The guest preacher, my friend Steve from Colorado, comes in, and he preaches a sermon from heaven for me. And he literally says, some of you out here need to get out, from under the pomegranate tree, and you need to go and follow your dreams and stop hiding. And I knew that God was telling me, go and follow your dream to be a senior pastor, to be the lead pastor of a church. Not a church. I even knew, he said, not a church planter, but a pastor of a church, as in this church and that church and whatever. And guess what happened? For the next 10, 15 years, I ran away from that. Like Jonah, I ran from that call because, in many ways, of the unresolved loss and insecurity of my childhood, because of that unresolved problem with losing a father when I was 12, 13. Something that really has helped me with my therapist is him saying, Trig, even though your dad was there through letters and he did his best, his darnest best to be there for you, it wasn't enough. Because I think that sometimes I try to rationalize that I shouldn't feel this way. Right? Anybody know what I'm talking about? That I shouldn't feel this trauma. That other people my age, again, they're doing fine, but that's not my story. And so then I go back and try to rationalize why I should be better, why I shouldn't feel this way. Well, he wrote me letters. Well, he couldn't help it. Well, there was a war. Well, what would I have rather have died? So you begin to try to rationalize your pain. It doesn't work. Stop rationalizing your pain. Stop trying to make yourself feel better by ignoring what really happened. By accepting what happened, you're not hating on your father. You're not hating on your childhood. You're not, especially for us Latinos, you're not hating on your parents, which is our greatest fear, right? It's the number one fear that we have as Latino men and women, that we are somehow disowning our mom and dad. I mean, that's the worst thing we could ever do. You're not disowning your mom by admitting that there was pain in your life in the way that you were raised, or the way that things went down, or the way that you lost your father when you were 15 or even 5. In fact, you're actually rising from the ashes. You're actually becoming stronger if you admit to yourself what took place, so that you can then gain the strength from that solitude and from that fear, have God come in and fill that with his peace, and then be able to rise and be a better, stronger individual that fulfills the dreams of your heart and the destiny that God has for you, to now help other people, to now be an example to others who are going through the same or worse things than you are. Am I preaching yet? Right? That's what I'm doing here now. But sometimes we have to go back, and we have to stop blaming ourselves and stop trying to be, and stop being afraid that we're somehow disowning or throwing dirt on the name of our fathers or of our mothers or of our abuelitas or of the person who raised us. You're not being a bad son by admitting that there was pain in your life. And in fact, it is when you do admit that pain, as I said, that you can then rise. So how do you rise? How do you then process this? I think the main thing is that we need to be in community with each other. We need to be in community with our own tribe. The people that have been through this, we need to talk. We need to be able to then find the strength to discourse along these things, to talk about our experiences. Because other people have been through similar things. And if we all hide from each other and we all simply just think that nothing happened, we're never going to be able to truly enter our destiny. Back to my story when I was a young pastor and I heard God call me to be a lead pastor, not a worship leader, but a senior pastor. As I said, it took me 10, 15 years to enter that destiny. That was hard. I don't feel regret per se, but I do recognize that what I went through impacted my life. Again, it's not bad for you as a young woman, as a young man, to look back and realize that there were things that hurt your life. You're not being a bad son. You're not being a bad daughter. In fact, as I said, you're being strong to rise above the cloud and to realize that there can be joy even though there was pain in the night. As I say all the time, though there's pain in the night, GOZO comes in the morning. But that process from darkness to light requires relationship. Number 2 is be sure that you are being honest with yourself. Be honest with how your childhood, be honest with how whatever happened back then impacted your life in negative or in positive ways. Obviously, we all talk about our positive, the positive impact that our parents had. In my case, I'm so thankful that my dad taught me how to play the guitar, how to sing, how to love the church, how to evangelize, how to be a faithful husband, how to love my kids, how to be beautiful, tall, dark, and handsome. Well, he wasn't so tall. I can write for hours on all the things that my dad did right, the things that I'm thankful for. But to actually realize the pain that being away from my dad costing me is important as well. Number 3 is make sure that you process this with people that know. It could be a trained professional, it could be a pastor, it could be a spiritual leader, it could be your mom, it could be a friend. Process this with others, especially with men and women who know how to help you. I think the biggest lesson is you can't just do this without new information, because you're going to just simply tell yourself the same thing over and over again. I was fine. It wasn't a big deal. I should be better. I should pray. This is bad. I'm being a bad daughter. I'm being a bad son. If you're in that cycle, that means that you need help. You need new information. And so for me, that is these friends that I have, these mentors that give me a different perspective without hurting my past, without blaming me or without making me feel worse. And then lastly, I would say rise. The goal of all this is not having a pity party and it's not having a blame game. It's about you having the courage to enter your destiny, to fulfill your God-given adventure, to discover what you love, to find grace in your crisis, what I call, as you know, the ACL experience, to find your adventure, to find grace in crisis, to discover who you love, and be able to be an awesome father and mother to your children, to your church, to your job, to your business, to your fellow workers. That is the point. That is the goal, is for you to be a better version of yourself in Christ. And what does that mean? Maybe the dream car that you have is on the other side of your trauma. Maybe you're not repeating the same mistake with being the same loser guys over and over and over again. It's on the other side of what awaits you once you process the trauma of when you were 5 and 7 years old. Maybe the millions of dollars that God desires for you to have in that great business or nonprofit or that wonderful church that God has called you to pastor or to lead is on the other side of you being honest with yourself and working through that trauma. And unless you work through that, you will never fulfill your destiny. You will just continue to make the same mistakes over and over again, being stuck. And do you know people that are stuck? Everyone around us is stuck. That's why you and I are meant to be GOZOduendes. We live on GOZO Street. We don't live on Failure Street. That's what everybody else does. Everybody else that has gone through the same thing or worse than us is living and choosing to live on Failure Street. They're not living La Vida GOZO. They're not living on GOZO Street. They're not living on GOZOlandia. They're not part of the GOZO planet like you and I are. That's your call. You're meant to be greater and better than the old version of yourself. But the only way that you're going to be able to be in that place is by following some of the steps that I mentioned, by being honest, seeking that help, and not blaming yourself for trying to be a perfectionist. Here's the thing that I want to close with. I would say the greatest hang-up that I've had in terms of growing up without my parents hasn't been that I feel, unfathered, or that I don't have any knowledge, or that I cry all the time. It's none of those things. It's that I have become a perfectionist, and that I have thought for many years that the only way to be worthy of God's love, to be worthy to have an awesome job, to be worthy to be a successful human being is if I am flawless. If I have the perfect skin, the perfect hair, the perfect degrees on my wall, the perfect everything. And you know how tiring that is? It's impossible. You cannot be that. For others, maybe you're the opposite. You have become a very apathetic and lazy person. You didn't go the route of perfectionist and overachieving. You went the route of underachieving. You gave in to drugs. You give in to loser husbands. You give in to the worst of you. You've gained a bunch of weight. You no longer even recognize the person in front of the mirror. You're like, who is that person? I don't even know who that is. Maybe for you, it's become anger, or maybe it's become addiction. Whatever that habit has been or is, that's where you need to start. You need to say, this is hurting me. I can't just ignore this. So I want to leave you with just a prayer and an invitation. First, I want to invite you. Here I am. Let's talk. I am in process. I am imperfectly seeking God in my own life. I still have 30, 40, 50 more years of life, and so do you. This is not the time to give up and hang up your tennis shoes. And second, be honest with yourself. Take time even today to write some of these things down. Go back on this video, watch it 25 times. Maybe there's just a 5-second clip that you think, man, that was for me. Take that to heart. Begin to process this with yourself, with God, with a friend. And let's come back here together. Write me an email, trig@davidtrig.com. Write me a comment on Periscope, YouTube, wherever you're watching me, on Facebook Live. And let's engage. Let's be a part of the community. And how about we do something like this? How about we have a Friendsgiving party of all of us, people with some sort of loss that are trying to be people of GOZO, people of joy, people who are rising from the ashes, because though there is pain in the night, GOZO comes in the morning. Because though there is joy though there is pain in the night and there's a valley of shadow of death, and although Satan had a plan, God had a greater plan. So let's come together. Let's have a party. If you have any ideas, let's come together. Let's plan something here in November, December, before the end of the holidays or before the end of the year, and let's come together. Thank you so much, my GOZO Nation, for being here. I wanted to give this message because I think it's very important, and it was time for me to let you into my life, and most of all, to be there for you. Thank you again. Have a great, great rest of this day.